Hi, everybody. I'm Whitney, and I'm here today to record a short little mini solo episode as an add-on spinoff from one of the topics for my episode with Ingrid Christine Abild Peterson, who I released her interview episode on Wednesday this week. Her episode was about her book, Unmasked, which is a memoir of recovery from childhood trauma, eating disorders, and PTSD. So on that episode, we spoke a lot about trauma, the nature of trauma, healing trauma, and what it means for trauma to be stored in our bodies and to be released during our life, throughout our life. We have these times where trauma can come up, trauma that we might not even have remembered or realized happened because maybe it happened when we were young or at a time in our life where it was too challenging to process. So it was sort of buried away within us. But trauma, sort of like when you have a foreign object that gets into your body, it will usually find its way out, right? Because it's not natural within there. It's meant to be released. So what I want to speak to on this episode is a real quick snippet of identifying trauma and then acknowledging what we can do once we realize we have some stored trauma, and then how to begin the healing process. So trauma is a huge, complex topic. So this is by no means the full breadth of how to work with it. Of course, we want to find a professional, and sometimes it takes many different sources to really work with trauma. Sometimes it can take a long time, but there's always a way to begin, even with ourselves, especially if you've already identified or begun to notice the trauma come up and you're looking for something to just kind of start with. I do want to offer that I am a licensed therapist and that I do specialize in trauma. If you are needing to do that kind of work, you can reach out to me. If you wouldn't work with me, then I could find you a referral. But it is very important that once we discover trauma, to find professional sources, as the healing process can be very complicated and scary, and we need to address it very gently. So what I want to offer today is first identifying trauma. So what does it mean to have trauma within us, to have stored trauma? So I like to think of trauma as almost like a little wounded animal. What it really is stored energy in the body. When we go through a traumatic situation, our energetic body it's kind of like a snapshot or like a screenshot on our computer. That moment is sort of frozen in time because we cannot properly process it because it's so jarring and upsetting to the system that the systems are on overload. There's too much to process mentally, emotionally, and physically at that time that it's just sort of just captured and then just kept, because in those times we often dissociate during trauma. So we're not able to be with ourselves, with our feelings. And so because of that, it can be so shocking that as we move on from it, we almost can imagine that it didn't even happen, because at the time we weren't really present. Especially with childhood trauma, that can be the case because children aren't meant to be able to understand significant and severe abuse that young, when they're in a place where they're supposed to be able to trust those around them, their caregivers. So, but at any age, trauma can be stored away. Sometimes we know about it, but we might say, it's fine, it's in the past, I just don't want to think about it, I just want to leave it behind. However, that stored energy doesn't just go away. And why I use the analogy of a wounded animal is it's kind of sitting in there, and it's an energy of fear, of feeling not safe, and of needing acknowledgement and comfort. Our trauma needs to be seen and it needs to be heard, right? If we try to just push it down and pretend like it didn't happen and it's not there, and that because time has passed that it's just dissipated, it's going to begin to manifest physically, which is another thing we talk about in my episode with Ingrid. She came to a point in her life where her childhood trauma that she didn't even know of consciously began to manifest physically in the form of paralyzation in her face. This will happen because there's a foreign body, there's this foreign feeling, this wound that needs to be healed. Another analogy I use is it's kind of like if you twist or sprain your ankle and you want to just to pretend it's fine. I don't want to look at it. I don't want to address it because I need to run this race next week. So I'm just going to pretend. So we keep running on it. And then it's going to get worse and worse and worse until we're forced to face it. We didn't want to face it, but now we're forced to. The same as with trauma. Although I will say there are people that will go their whole lives without ever addressing it, but they will feel the repercussions of that. They might feel great sadness. They might feel great anger. Trauma, unresolved trauma can manifest itself in many ways. So, identifying it. If you are aware of it, then maybe and you're ready to address that time in your life, that situation, that moment, that incident, then it's about really sitting with it and noticing it, right? If you're not aware of it, then the physical symptoms might come first, right? Like an Ingrid story. If you're starting to start getting ailments in your body, right? It can be like numbness or paralyzation. That's pretty common with trauma. It can be shaking. It can be insomnia. And if we go to the doctors, they might, try to just do physical diagnoses. But if you have a sense that it's something deeper, which Ingrid speaks to, that she just kind of knew, somehow she just knew that this was related to something that happened that she'd forgotten and she needed to explore. She used hypnosis, which is a great form. You can reach out to a therapist, a hypnotherapist, an energy healer, anybody who really works with the energetic body of understanding it and helping you to, in a safe, supported environment, to work through it. Okay. But speaking for someone who knows that it's there, right? Maybe something happened to you 5 years ago and you've just wanted to move on from it, but you're realizing it still hurts. It's still affecting you. It might impact your relationships. It might impact your ability to trust or to get involved with anybody, to do well at work, to have confidence. Trauma can affect every area of our life because it affects how we feel about ourselves and our belief about ourselves, or our belief about other people, or our belief about life, depending on the nature of the trauma. So once we have acknowledged this little trauma, and I work with clients on it, and sometimes they feel it in different parts. Often it's sort of like in the abdomen or the stomach, and they can feel like it's sort of like stuck in there. And sometimes I'll do a guided meditation where I have someone, I use the analogy, I have them imagine that they're a scuba diver, and they kind of go deep into the recess of their body. And as they get closer, they reach their light, which if you watch my episode on finding like your core self, like your true and eternal, infinite self of worth and light, of divinity, it's kind of like getting to that light. And once you're in there, that light can shed light on what's in the darkness. Some people see their trauma as like a locked up box, like this thing that's just been like locked down there. Some people see it as like a dark rock or formation, almost like a tumor. When I've done mine, I visualized it as like this like murky pond, like a really dark with like thick mud in it that was just like deep with sadness that I had to dip into to really feel it and let it go. So that's the point I'm trying to make, is that we identify our trauma and then we need to hold it. Right? So we acknowledge that it's there and then we let it be seen. No matter how scary or ugly or, unimaginable it seems, that is a part of you. It's the part of you that experienced that trauma. You can call it a wounded animal, but also it's, commonly referred to the wounded child in inner child work. It's that version of you at that age that this incident happened, that's still, again, feeling unsafe and scared and unsure if it's okay that they went through what they went through, and if they can still be lovable and worthy and of value despite what happened. So we let it be seen, and we look at it and we say, I see you and I hear you and I love you. Even though this was such a horrific thing to endure and experience, I see you. And I do want to acknowledge that I have worked with many individuals who are not yet ready to touch that trauma. That when we did that exercise where you go down, you scuba dive down there and you find it, they said, it's too much. And they would go into a panic. So again, such gentleness is needed in the trauma process. That's why it's important to work with a professional to very slowly get to the point where you can even see your trauma, let alone hold it. So I'm just offering this just in case maybe you're already very aware and acquainted with your trauma and you're ready to say, okay, I'm ready to hold it and see it and hear it and love it. Because then once we do that, if you think of trauma as stored energy, once you allow energy to begin opening and moving, it can move on, right? It can be seen and it can dissipate. We also call it integration, because a big part that really impacts us about trauma is it can lead to rejecting parts of ourselves. So to saying that, like, I am leaving this part behind. Another concept you can look up is called soul retrieval. Inner child work, soul retrieval, fairly similar concepts where we have rejected the parts of ourselves that have been through something or done something that was so unimaginable or horrific that we've said, that's not me. But the problem is that it is you. And as long as we dismiss it, we're never fully whole and integrated. So the idea is that once we see that energy, it releases that heaviness that makes it sort of wounding, and sort of almost another analogy, I'm big on analogies, is it becomes like this, well, it's kind of like a wound, how it will like almost pulsate. Like, you know how when you cut your finger and it's healing, you're like, I can feel like it pulsing. It's that energy. It's because our cells, our bodies are amazing. So all this energy will rush through our cells to help heal that portion. So there'll be a lot of focused energy. So once we see it, because it's been pulsing and trying to be noticed, we can hold it, and then it'll move from that like dense energy to healed energy, which can then be integrated back and remember, oh, right, I'm not the part of me that's unacceptable. I was just a part of me that went through a really upsetting thing, but now I'm welcome back to the whole. Okay. So just to recap a little bit, again, this is very simplistic, and it's not the whole spectrum of how to address trauma. But trauma, sometimes it's like a lot of layers that it takes, a lot of, going brush strokes back and forth to even address it. So this is just something to offer to get you started. But again, if you try one of these and you feel maybe like this sense of dissociation or a sense of anxiety because you're not ready, then honor that, right? And then maybe it means it's time to work with a professional, because trauma is very sensitive and needs to be, again, addressed very gently. But we can identify it by either, if there's persistent physical symptoms, we might say, is there some trauma that I'm holding that I'm not acknowledging? Or again, if we know already the traumatic event and realize that we've never really dealt with it and realizing that it's impacting ourselves and our lives and our relationships, then maybe we're ready to kind of explore it and do that dive inward, see if we can find where it is. If we're ready, see if we can touch it, bring it to the light, look at it, acknowledge it, hear it, let it know that it is seen, it is heard, and that you love it, and you're ready to release any energy that is of rejection and bring only energy of love and acceptance, so that you can reintegrate that part of yourself, that energy that felt like it was separate from rather than a part of. So I hope that's helpful. I'll be doing a lot more episodes on trauma because it's such a big topic and something that I feel very passionately about working with, as I've had a lot of my own trauma and seen the value of doing these different exercises to address trauma, which again can be inner child work, soul retrieval. We can address it through therapy, through hypnotherapy, through guided meditations. And I can leave a few resources for those in these show notes. And of course, you can also always contact me if you're wanting to begin that work with a licensed professional. All right. I wish you all the very best. Have a beautiful day. Thanks for listening.